Krishna 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 Hare Krishna 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Surabhyaya Namaha
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 Mukham karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim Yat kripat maham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam Yat kripat maham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Welcome to our Bhagavatam class. Reading from Canto number 1, chapter 1, text number 1, and today we will be finishing the purport. I will just read the text again. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Janmadyasya Yatun Vayad Itaratas Charteshvabhigna Swarat Tene Brahmaridaya Adikavayi Muyanti Yatsuraya Tejo Varimridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi. So the last portion of the purport. Unless one surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, it is certain that he will be. Then only can such an intelligent man become a Mahatma, or great soul. But such a great soul is rarely seen. Only the Mahatmas can understand that the Supreme Lord is the primeval cause of all creations. He is Parama, or ultimate truth, because all other truths are relative to him. He is omniscient. For him, there is no illusion. Some Mayavadi scholars argue that Srimad Bhagavatam was not compiled by Sri Vyasadeva, and some of them suggest that this book is a modern creation written by someone named Vopadeva. In order to refute such meaningless arguments, Sridhar Swami points out that there is reference to the Bhagavatam in many of the oldest Puranas. The first shloka of the Bhagavatam begins with the Gayatri Mantra. There is reference to this in the Matsya Purana, which is the oldest Purana. In that Purana, it is said with reference to the Gayatri Mantra in the Bhagavatam that there are many narrations of spiritual instructions beginning with the Gayatri Mantra. And there is the history of Vritrasura. Anyone who makes a gift of this great work on a full moon day attains to the highest perfection of life by returning to Godhead. There is reference to the Bhagavatam in other Puranas also, where it is clearly stated that this work was finished in 12 cantos, which include 18,000 shlokas. In the Padma Purana also, there is reference to the Bhagavatam in a conversation between Gautama and Maharaj Ambarish. The king was advised therein to read regularly Srimad Bhagavatam if he desired liberation from material bondage. Under the circumstances, there is no doubt about the authority of the Bhagavatam. Within the past 500 years, many erudite scholars and acharyas like Jiva Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Vishwanath Chakrabarti, Balabhacharya, and many other distinguished scholars, even after the time of Lord Chaitanya, made elaborate commentaries on the Bhagavatam. And the serious student would do well to attempt to go through them to better relish the transcendental messages. So here Prabhupada is giving some of the references which establish the authenticity or validity of the Bhagavatam, which is sometimes, as mentioned here, put into question. A few years ago I came across, some of you may know, because you're from India, what is called the Devi Bhagavatam. Anyone hear about Devi Bhagavatam?
Yes, miss.
Yes. Have you read?
No. Heard some points from few people.
Yeah. So Devi Bhagavatam also has 18,000 verses, and there are so many similarities, but it does not establish or recognize Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, therefore the importance of actually, and this point is being made here also, receiving this knowledge in proper Guru Parampara and based on the very basic and fundamental understanding, which is also there in the Bhagavatam, Krishna Su Bhagavan Swayam, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we all know how in line with all of the major previous Vaishnava acharyas, Prabhupada is quoting Sridhar Swami, and then they have all accepted Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then Prabhupada continues a little bit here, something which is only understood by, by Mahatmas, quoting or making reference to Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur. Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur specifically deals with the original and pure sex psychology that is referred to as Adi Rasa, Adi Ras, devoid of all mundane inebriety. And in italic means to underline this. The following line is in italic. The whole material creation is moving under the principle of sex life. In modern civilization, sex life is the focal point for all activities. Wherever one turns his face, he sees sex life predominant. Therefore, sex life is not unreal. Its reality is experienced in the spiritual world. The material sex life is but a perverted reflection of the original fact. The original fact is in the absolute truth, and thus the absolute truth cannot be impersonal. It is not possible to be impersonal and contain pure sex life. Consequently, the impersonalist philosophers have given indirect impetus to the abominable mundane sex life because they have overstressed the impersonality of the ultimate truth. Consequently, man without information of the actual spiritual form of sex has accepted perverted material sex life as the all-in-all. There is a distinction between sex life in the diseased material condition and spiritual sex life. Right in the middle of Bhagavatam class. Just a short last paragraph. This Srimad Bhagavatam will gradually elevate the unbiased reader to the highest perfectional stage of transcendence. It will enable him to transcend the three modes of material nature, the three modes of material activities, fruitive actions, speculative philosophy, and worship of functional deities are inculcated in Vedic verses. So this last point actually is very interesting, very important also. As Prabhupada clearly mentions or explains, the whole world actually is attracted by sex life or Cupid. Everyone is being pierced by the arrows of Cupid. And yes, no one is spared, so to speak. Not so long ago, one friend of mine had called me expressing his concern about he was getting different realizations about sex life, and how as we grow older we lose that ability of sex life. And I happen to make reference to this particular section of the Bhagavatam where Prabhupada is quoting one of our foremost of acharyas, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, wherein he explains about sex psychology. that anything which exists in the material world is but a perverted reflection of the original thing that exists in the spiritual world. But this can only be understood by those who are purified in consciousness. Just like Prabhupada would explain how is it that a personality like Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was in a renounced order of life, how he could glorify the activities of Krishna and the gopis in Vrindavan. So, as we read also earlier in this particular chapter, or rather verse, purport, this most elevated and confidential subject matter of the Bhagavatam is only addressed or discussed much later in the 10th canto. And we will see actually in the very next verse of the Bhagavatam that the Bhagavatam itself has been or is meant for those who are already purified in consciousness, or who have taken steps or measures to become purified in consciousness. So this is our text that is coming up, which also has quite a long purport. And we'll begin this verse today also. So everyone can repeat after me. Dharma projita kaitabo atra parama nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavam atra vastu shivadam tapa trayonmulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kim Va Parar Isvaraha Sadyo Ridi Avarudyate Atra Kritibhihi Shushrushubish Tat Kshanat Dharma projita kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavam matra vastu shivadam tapo trayon mulanam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kim Va Pararishvaraha Sadyo Ridya Varudyate Tra Kritivi Shushrusubis Tat Kshanat. So the translation: completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavat Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva, in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within the heart. So you can repeat after me. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavat Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality, distinguished from illusion, for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. Purport. Religion includes 4 primary subjects, namely pious activities, economic development, satisfaction of the senses, and finally liberation from material bondage. Dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Irreligious life is a barbarous condition. Indeed, human life begins when religion begins. Eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating are the 4 principles of animal life. These are common both to animals and to human beings. But religion is the extra function of the human being. Without religion, human life is no better than animal life. Therefore, in human societies, there is some form of religion which aims at self-realization and which makes reference to man's eternal relationship with God. In the lower stages of human civilization, there is always competition to lord it over the material nature. Or in other words, there is a continuous rivalry to satisfy the senses. Driven by such consciousness, man turns to religion. He thus performs pious activities or religious functions in order to gain something material. But if such material gains are obtainable in other ways, then so-called religion is neglected. And this is the situation in modern civilization. man is thriving economically. So at present he is not very interested in religion. Churches, mosques, or temples are now practically vacant. Men are more interested in factories, shops, and cinemas than in religious places which were erected by their forefathers. This practically proves that religion is performed for some economic gains. Economic gains are needed for sense gratification. Often when one is baffled in the pursuit of sense gratification, he takes to salvation and tries to become one with the Supreme Lord. Consequently, all these states are simply different types of sense gratification. Just like in America, the founding fathers of America, those who established and composed or wrote the Constitution, they were actually very religious minded, and that is how we find today on the US dollar bill, "In God we trust," isn't it? But Prabhupada is pointing out here that most people who practice religion, they practice religion for some material gain, for some material motivation. And if they get this material gain, if they obtain something material, they will lose their interest in religion. Prabhupada gives the example of in the communist countries, the communist people would go and wait for the people to come out of the church. And they would have a big truckload of bread. And when people would come out, they would ask them, "Did you pray to your God in the church?" "Yes, we prayed to our God." Because in Christianity, one of the main prayers that is daily recited is that, "Oh God, give us today our daily bread." So the communist people, a little intelligent, "Did you get your bread?" You're coming out of the church, you ask God for bread. "Did you get your bread?" "No, sir, did not get bread." They would open their truck. "Here we have bread. We are your God, we'll supply you." So when Prabhupada is telling that anecdote, he's telling most people they are very simple-minded, but one should be asking those communist people, "You rascal, where you got this bread? You did not manufacture in the factory. You had to grow. It comes from the land. The land doesn't belong to you." Isn't it? So this verse especially is pointing out that of course, it is good that one go to church, even if one is asking for some bread or for something material. But that is not pure religion. That is motivated. And therefore the Bhagavatam from the very beginning, the first verse from the very beginning is establishing Krishna as the Supreme Godhead, Supreme Personality of Godhead. And second verse is establishing that actual dharma, it is not for some material gain. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. it's interesting actually, because sometimes we, of course, we should reject this dharma, artha, kama, moksha when it is materially motivated. When we perform religious activities to get money, to get some gain, economic gain, for sense gratification. But there is, of course, that dharma, and Bhagavatam is based on that dharma, which is completely devoid of any material tinge. And therefore the verse is explaining that Bhagavatam rejects all kinds of such materially motivated activities. And this immediately gives us a clue or understanding that Bhagavatam will be speaking about this pure dharma, what is explained in the Nectar of Devotion as unalloyed devotional service. One time Srila Prabhupada was in America, and he told the devotees one day, let's go for a car ride. Prabhupada wasn't just interested in any car ride, but the devotees didn't know where. This was in Boston, I believe. So Prabhupada, devotees were all very enthusiastic to go with Srila Prabhupada, naturally, whether it was a morning walk or a car ride. And then Prabhupada, nobody knew where Prabhupada was going, but they all wanted to be with Prabhupada. So Prabhupada was telling the driver, turn right, turn left, go straight, like that. And the devotees were... Then finally, after some time, they came to the... when Prabhupada first landed in America. That place where he actually landed in America. And then after walking around a little bit, Prabhupada took his cane and he showed one big, huge sign. And that sign, it was written, unalloyed steel. Unalloyed steel means pure, without any other metal. So in other words, when Prabhupada, he would notice these different things like this, and he would incorporate that in his presentation of Krishna consciousness. So Bhagavatam is all about unalloyed steel, or rather unalloyed devotional service, like unalloyed steel, pure. And therefore completely rejecting anything that is materially motivated, which is generally the case for those who are involved with dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. But there's another meaning. This is actually the real meaning of dharma. Will when we actually follow dharma, just like the residents of Vrindavan, they were the examples of the most elevated living entities situated on pure unalloyed devotional service. When we perform that kind of dharma without material motivation, the artha will come. The artha will come to meet or to satisfy, and this is a verse that will be coming up also, to meet and satisfy our basic material necessities of life. And also in abundance. the residents of Vrindavan, they were spiritually very rich and also materially very rich. Now in modern day society we are rejecting dharma and simply trying to focus on artha and kama, and we see the kind of results. It doesn't work because we're not following the actual process or the formula. So it means that when one factually understands, and that's why the Bhagavatam is so important, because the Bhagavatam is that book, we say par excellence, it is that unique transcendental literature that presents fully and purely the essence of dharma, which is bhakti. And of course, one of the very important verses that will be coming up, which I think every devotee is knowing, what is the param dharma? That verse, Sabai pumsam paro dharma. That param dharma. So Bhagavatam is dealing with the param dharma, which is rendering of devotional service to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So that means that unless we know that Supreme Personality of Godhead, we cannot perform devotional service. We cannot understand or don't understand what is actually dharma. The same example that is mentioned at the end of the purport, Prabhupada speaking about, quoting Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who is speaking about sex psychology and how the material attraction to sex life is there because the real thing is there in the spiritual world, but in its pure form. In the material world it is referred to as kama, lust. But in the spiritual world, in English is a bad language in that it doesn't have the kind of words that will explain subtle differences, you see. But in Sanskrit we speak of there is kama and then there is prema. Generally kama is translated as lust, which is materially motivated and for our selfish interest or purpose, whereas prema or priti also, Srila Jiva Goswami refers to one of his sandarbhas is priti sandarbha, the last of the sandarbhas. The culmination of dharma is priti, pure unalloyed love or pure unalloyed devotional service. And Prabhupada would explain to his early disciples that actually there is no love in this material world, because it is based, although everyone is speaking about love, everyone is writing songs about love, everyone is involved in loving affairs in different ways, but the factual, pure, original, unalloyed love, which everyone is hankering for, exists in the spiritual world and is also available in the material world, but only to those who are completely purified in consciousness. So any thoughts about, we just tomorrow we'll read because that's also a long purport of the second verse of the Bhagavatam. Yes. I can see your hand.
Yes, sir. Maharaj, in spiritual world, says, here perverted form, in original form, through these 5 rasas, this we can take one another, that love, 5 rasas. According to that, I want to confirm only, Maharaj.
The question is that in the material world there are,
in material world there is perverted form.
yes,
In
the spiritual world.
there is in real form.
Yes.
So in real form it's only that 5 rasas, that Sant rasa,
Okay.
and
Yes. Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsarya, and Madhurya. So you're asking whether the 5 rasas that we hear about or that we experience in the material world, when whether there are more rasas in the spiritual world.
no, in here we are feeling that in perverted form.
Yes.
In spiritual realm it is in real form. Is it that, Maharaj?
Yes, if it is perverted here, that means the real, original, transcendental form is in the spiritual world. But it can also become manifest. It can also be experienced in the material world for those who have developed consciousness. Yeah. But we know that it is, especially in the material world, it is something that is very rare. But that is the goal and the objective and the endeavor of those who are cultivating this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So yes, in the spiritual world it is fully existing in its pure, unadulterated, uncontaminated, pure transcendental form, right? And therefore, as we put into practice Krishna consciousness, we can begin to experience, to some extent, some of these rasas. And those, as one becomes more and more, let's say, purified in consciousness, then one's attraction increases, one's attraction for the spiritual realm or the spiritual activities increases, and as that increases, the other level decreases, isn't it? And Prabhupada would quote Yamanujacharya, who would say that who previously was a king and therefore was engaged in all kinds of sensual activities, but after coming in contact with Krishna consciousness, would say that whenever I think of mundane, ordinary sex life, I spite on it. Prabhupada would say, I spite on it. I spit on it. Means I reject it. Yeah. So only those who are experiencing or who have tasted or who are tasting this pure realm of transcendence will no longer be attracted. Just like in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there is the example in Jagannath Puri that who is it? I believe Ramananda Roy, who was delegated for direct. He knew about the art of dancing, right? You've read that possibly, yeah. So it was the custom in the palace, and nowadays we don't have any palaces, so that we don't see that custom. It's there actually in Cambodia, because they still have. Cambodia is still a kingdom. They call it the Kingdom of Cambodia, or the Kingdom of Thailand. So they still have kings actually, although they're not ruling the country. But they have like once a year special dance by young girls, for the pleasure of the king. Or just like we have examples in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, performing drama. Drama is actually a very important activity in Krishna consciousness. So kings would have a special kind of dance, and for that a lot of training would be required. And Ramananda Roy was himself engaged in training these young girls, but because he was totally situated on the transcendental platform, he was not agitated. Yeah. So that is there in the pages of the Bhagavatam, and that is why we practice Krishna consciousness, so that we can become qualified one day to actually experience this higher realm. And it is only by experiencing the higher realm that we can actually give up the lower realm. Yeah. So yes, in the spiritual sky, that original rasa is there. Yes.
Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. People, which one is first?
Which one is first?
Yes,
Well, Dharma is first, except in modern day society, Artha is first. The formula is Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. But in modern day society, we have taken out the Dharma and we have taken out the Moksha. We just want Artha and Kama. We want to make money and enjoy. Isn't it? Yeah. But the formula doesn't work like that, because we cannot enjoy. That was another thing that Prabhupada would explain to his early disciples. Forget about finding happiness in the material world, because actually everyone is working, endeavoring so hard, isn't it, to be happy, to find happiness. Prabhupada would explain, there is no happiness in the material world. Otherwise, why Krishna says, Dukkalayam ashasvatam. Happiness is something that is in the spiritual world. Original, pure sex psychology, sex life is there in the spiritual world. The whole world is attracted to sex life, but it's not to be found in the material world. It's the perverted reflection. It's the mirage in the desert. It's a very vivid mirage because everyone is falling for it. Very strong. Yeah. Okay, we can discuss more tomorrow. Jai Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai Sri Prabhupada ki Gaura Pimanande.
His Holiness Bhakti Raghava Swami Maharaj ki Jai.
Yeah.